Hi, everybody. I'm Wendy Murdoch, and this is Webinars with Wendy. We are continuing our series of webinars, even with Mercury in retrograde. We had a little trouble getting Anne-Marie's video up and running, but we got it now. And I'm so glad to have her back for yet another fascinating webinar. Welcome, Anne-Marie. Thank you for joining me today.
Sure. Thanks for having me.
It's great. I love having you. And I have to admit that I went out and I looked at my horse's teeth after one of your webinars and I went, OMG, maybe that's why we have this left front issue. So now I'm waiting for my dentist so I can talk to her and get that resolved. But
that's perfect.
Yeah, but I was shocked because I looked at an old photograph that I was just randomly looking at and I went, oh, what is his teeth doing? And then I went and looked at the horse and went, oh, that's what they're doing. So.
I know it's more important than you think.
Well, and you look at your horse over and over again, and I mean, I have good people working on my horse. It's not like I'm living in I live where we have a lot of options, and so for me to discover that after all these webinars that I've done and realize that there's still something that I've missed. And then there's all the people that either don't have those services or haven't watched all these webinars like I.
Right.
But
the teeth can happen, in spite of a good dentist, because it can happen over like a period of a year or two, so they could have been fine. And then the horse's balance changes for some reason. And then that will start to change the teeth, right? And then the teeth are the problem after you get the balance figured out, because now they're uneven. And you have
to fix
them.
The front leg lameness, which we have blocked, could actually be the cause of the teeth. I hadn't thought about it that way.
Yeah. So, but then you fix the front limb lameness and you don't fix the teeth are going to create that repetitive pattern of movement. So you have to do both to finally get through it.
Right. Right. So, cool, right? The soundness is definitely better, except when it was really hard ground on an angle, but the ground is softened a bit. And that's the only time I've seen it now. But yes, now we got to get the teeth sorted out. So it's been great. I just, it was like such a surprise, and yet it was so timely, right?
Right.
Looked at his teeth and went, OMG. All right. So today we're going to talk about insulin resistance, and I will let you just take it away. And I think I've made you co-host.
Okay, let me see if it says I can share my screen. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. All right. So can you guys all see the PowerPoint?
Yep.
Okay, great. So I'm going to start the slideshow. All right, so what we're going to talk about today is we're talking about timely sorts of things. Is we're going to talk about laminitis and the risk of laminitis and nutrition, and how does that also combine with endocrine problems like insulin dysregulation and Cushing's and all that fun stuff. And I do think this is perfect timing for this year. Normally, at least in Northern Virginia, we see most of our laminitis cases in like March or April. But this year, it seems like they're a little bit later. And I think that's because the spring has been so odd. So here we've had rain and like a warm day, and then frost, and then a warm day, and then cold, and then dry. And so I think our grass really started growing maybe about 2 weeks ago, at least for me anyway. So I feel like we've just hit that sort of, lucky time of year when all of the horses blimp up all of a sudden, and that horse that was maybe a little bit overweight, but not too bad, all of a sudden looks like it's 200 pounds overweight, and it has a big crest on its neck, and we've got to get them off pastures, because they're just getting so much sugar. And so we're going to, talk about that. And again, if you guys have any questions, put them in the chat. If I don't see them, Wendy, if you can just interrupt me and ask questions, we'll just go through as we go through it, so you guys can ask lots of questions. So I think what we need to start with is, what is a good diet? So many of us think that we're feeding amazing feed and we know what we're doing, and none of us do. I mean, I don't even know what I'm doing most of the time. So I mean, it changes all the time, which makes it confusing. And what you thought was in your bag of feed is going to change from year to year, because you're talking about a feed mill that's trying to cut costs, make a profit, make sure that they can find the ingredients they want. So even if you think that you have a really good product, you still need to be keeping up on it, right? Because it could be changing, as far as the ingredients and what's in it. So I think the key is that what all horses need is really good forage. So the majority of your feed should be hay or pasture. And that shouldn't be fantastic pasture. So don't feel like you have to have the greenest grass, of all of your neighbors. A better grass for most horses, unless they're really old and really thin, is a little bit of a weedy pasture that isn't so attractive, that hasn't been fertilized every year. It's just better for them. They don't need all of the lush grass. And I do think they do better with some of those weeds. Like dandelion is actually a really healthy feed. It has a lot of good liver protection sort of additives in it. It's really a good thing to give to horses. So when we spray for all these broadleaves, we get rid of the dandelions and we get rid of all of those things, we might actually be doing them a disservice by getting rid of some of those weeds that would be good for them. So pasture or hay, that's what you want to do. If you can't feed hay, like you have a really old horse, then chopped hay, silage, for our really, really old geriatric horses, we feed senior feed, but 20 or 15 is not necessarily senior anymore. So to me, a senior senior horse is like over 25 to 30, when they're starting to not be able to chew as well. So I'm looking more at what does their dentition say they are, and can they maintain their weight, then how old are they?
It's
so how do you choose?
Longer horses are living, isn't it? I mean,
I know they live to like 40 now.
Yeah.
So we can't be thinking of 15 or 20 as geriatric. And we're seeing so many show horses in that 20 to 25 range that are still competing really well, that I think we need to stop thinking of those as senior horses. So, how do you feed and what's appropriate? So this is an example of like a hardware keeper. You're going to need a 10 to 14% protein, higher fat, right? Because they're working really hard or they need the extra calories. So 8 to 10% fat, lots of fiber. And the key thing that I like to add in these that a lot of people don't think about is down here, this copper and zinc, lots. So most of the country, unless you live in Colorado or the high plains, but most of us that live on the coast are going to be very deficient in copper and zinc. And we need tons of it. So a lot of what we see as far as problems have to do with what these horses are lacking in minerals, and especially the copper and zinc and trace minerals.
Can you overdo copper and zinc?
I think it would be hard because we're so deficient. I would be a little worried in the middle of the country where they aren't as deficient. But I mean, I think that in general, it's pretty safe. So like what I'm having most people feed is somewhere around 800 to 1,000 milligrams of zinc a day. And I don't worry about that at all. And I think, what we use a lot of zinc in people, right? When you're sick, they take high levels of zinc. So I think that it's pretty safe. You're not going to have to worry about it. It probably gets excreted out in your hair and skin, in kind of that way, if you have over amounts of it. So I think it's relatively safe. So just some guidelines for you guys, lots of extra copper and zinc, good probiotics. The one on the bottom here is one that we have found that we really like. It's called Healthy Gut Performance Probiotics. I think that the jury's still out on probiotics. There are so many of them.
Yeah.
I think that the real key is getting the right food in there so that the good bacteria can then colonize and be more natural in the environment than us throwing a whole bunch of bacteria in there all the time. And so I would say if you're going to use a probiotic or a prebiotic, it shouldn't be a all year same brand all the time sort of thing. So maybe use it when you have a environmental change, like maybe use it in October and November when you're going from grass to hay, or use it if you have to give medications, like, you have to do a course of antibiotics. I would use it then, just try to use it judiciously without having them on it all the time. And I would certainly try changing brands some, so you get some variety in it. which is why I don't necessarily want a whole lot of it in my feed bag, right? Because then you're getting the same thing thrown in every single day and you don't get to change that. And I don't think that's good for the horses either. And this other supplement over here is something that we really like to use for buffering and balancing the GI tract, especially the hindgut, without causing a lot of problems with changing and altering the pH. So it's just on there. It's just another thing to kind of look at. It's made by the people that make Cool Stance, which makes coconut products. How do you choose appropriate ones? So, this is, just remember to look at that NSC value, right? So this is the one that people talk about with horses that have laminitis. You want your hay to be less than 10%, so look at how high a lot of these grains are. So this is your Triple Crown Naturals. This is 20% starch. So maybe not a great, source for your laminitic horses or pre-laminitic horses. So you're trying to stick with something that's under 10. So like, I really like these Timothy Balance Cubes or the grass forage. I do like alfalfa a lot. I have recently started thinking about alfalfa as maybe not being as great for the hindgut because it does increase a little bit of acidosis in the hindgut. So I tend to kind of head more towards the grass hays now than I used to. So just kind of putting it up there just to remind you to look at that NSC. So how do you pick a good trace mineral supplement? You have to look at you have to kind of read between the lines, right? Everything gets listed in these ppms and percentages, right? So ppm is parts per million. So if there's 50 ppms in a feed, that means if you feed 2 pounds, your horse gets 50 milligrams, right? So here, if you feed 2 pounds of safe starch, the horse gets 35 milligrams of copper, and 120 milligrams of zinc. So like we were saying earlier, if you want to get, 800 to 1,000 milligrams of zinc in a day, you would have to feed 10 pounds of safe starch per day to get, the right amount of zinc. Now, the other thing to look at here is what is the source of the mineral? So if you guys follow my little arrow, do you guys see where
it's a little hard to read.
Okay, it's going to be tiny. So I'm just going to show it to you and I'll explain it to you. Sorry, let me turn my phone on silent so you don't have to listen to that. Okay, so if you look down here under ingredients, there's an area where it has a whole bunch of different things listed. Like here it says zinc sulfate and zinc amino acid complex, right? And then it says ferrous sulfate, iron amino acid complex, copper sulfate, copper amino acid complex. So what we know is that when you're looking for trace minerals and you want them to be absorbed, the amino acid complexes are way better at getting those into the body than the sulfate. So if you can find something that only has zinc amino acid complex and not zinc sulfate, you're going to get a way better, more absorbable supplement. What a lot of these, production type feeds are doing is they know that the zinc amino acid complex is what people want, or that they want their trace minerals bound to amino acids. So they're putting them in there, but the sulfate ones are way cheaper. So what they're doing right now is they're doing a 70%, 30%, where 70% is the sulfate and 30% is the amino acid, which isn't really helpful, right? Because that sulfate one is pro-inflammatory and it's gonna, not be as absorbable. So then, even though, like I said, you would have to feed 10 pounds of this feed to get the right amount of zinc, it might be more like 13 to 15 pounds because the zinc sulfate isn't as absorbable as the zinc amino acid complex. So, just something to think about.
It's not like if we tested our hay and that sort of thing, we would find that it's not got very much zinc and copper in it. Is that true? That our soils are deficient? So we have to add it in a supplement in some way because our forage, which should be our primary diet, doesn't have it enough.
That's exactly right. Yeah, like just the whole East Coast and West Coast, any place that's been a floodplain or has been coastal, we've had a lot of leaching. And then the way that we do agriculture nowadays, where we reuse the fields a lot, we deplete all those minerals from the soils too. So it's kind of a combination of the two things as far as why we don't have it. But yeah, I mean, I very rarely see a horse that isn't incredibly deficient. You know, I think I've maybe seen like 2 or 3 normals. The rest of
Wow.
them are deficient.
And
Yeah.
do you test that with a blood test?
No, so this is the other kind of tricky thing is the blood is going to be the last thing that's going to show you anything, because a blood sample is a second in time, and the blood is meant to keep your body at homeostasis, right? So at a normal level. So the blood's always going to try to pull from anywhere it needs to, or remove from anywhere it needs to keep that level normal. So using blood samples for testing trace minerals has been really hard to do. So what we use is hair tissue and mineral analysis. And so we take a sample of it's like the most current 2 to 3 inches of hair. So, you know, you cut right at the base of the mane on the underside, and you want to just keep the newest 2 to 3 inches, and you have to send about a tablespoon. And what you're getting there is still not the level that the body has. It's how much can the body afford to excrete. Right?
Oh.
So you're not getting a true, like, this is what's in the body, but it gives you an idea of what can the body afford to get rid of. And then you can use that to help you interpret things. So we use that to help us interpret adrenal problems, thyroid problems. We can look at it for insulin, problems, Cushing's problems, so it kind of helps us with that. And it gives us a good place to start. But yeah, there just is no very accurate way to be like, oh, I know that the body has this level of zinc, with what we have to test. Okay, so we kind of went through that. These are 3 of the ones I really like. So there are lots of other ones out there. These are just happen to be 3 of the ones that we use the most. So the one on the far right, the higher one, is High Point grass. That's their mineral supplement, and that one has a little less zinc and copper, so you have to feed double to get the amount right. But it's really palatable, and they have lots of flavors, and they can put it in pellets, and so that one's really nice when you have piggy horses. The one in the center here is the Vermont Blend. It's a really nice supplement. What I like the most about that one is that it has very few additives. It's very simple. If you look at the ingredient label, it's just really clean. There's no question about what's in it. They are now using these amino acid complexes, so copper amino acid. They're using the Zinpro, which is what is in the Kiss Trace too. And that's a really absorbable zinc. So we like that. And it has a nice high level. Zinc's at 900 milligrams per serving. This one comes as a powder. So if you have piggy horses, they might not eat it. The Kiss Trace is the other one I really like. She makes a powder and a pellet. So you can do either one. And it's the same thing. She's got everything's bound as an amino acid complex, copper, zinc. And she has a few other additives in here compared to the Vermont Blend. So depending on how picky you are on additives, the Kiss Trace has a few more things in it than the Vermont Blend. But those 3 seem to have really good sources for trace minerals, and they're making good products. So they're just up there for you guys to see. I just like this picture. This is what we deal with our ponies, right? And everybody's like, oh, but they're so cute and they're so hungry, and so we keep feeding them, right? And then they end up with problems like laminitis. So we're going to just kind of talk a little bit about what do we define as metabolic disease? What do you have with Cushing's versus insulin dysregulation? Why do we keep changing the name, which I'm sure you guys wonder. So the majority of horses that we deal with these problems are going to be older. This one, with Cushing's especially, they're usually over the age of 15 or 20. I think we're testing more and more that we're calling Cushing's, but I think we need to be a little careful about that. What we test for, what the majority of us do when we're testing to see if they have Cushing's, is we're looking for either a baseline or a result of a stimulation test. What is the ACTH. So ACTH is the short version of adrenocorticotrophic hormone, and it's a hormone that's secreted by the pituitary gland, and it's supposed to stimulate cortisol release from the adrenal glands, right? So it can be elevated at times of stress or pain, as well as it can be elevated with primary pituitary problems. So I think a lot of times what we end up testing and calling Cushing's could be something that could be changed with diet and eliminating stresses and pain, versus just putting them on a drug that then suppresses that number. So I think that's probably like one of the primary things we need to start thinking about, is looking at the whole axis of hormones, and then looking at the whole horse and deciding if the treatment is covering up a symptom of another problem, or is it truly that that's the primary disease?
Well, and isn't the term Cushing's actually not really accurate for horses? We had a webinar with Dr. Harmon, I think it was a year or so ago, and discussed it's the common word. It's kind of like founder. It's a common word
Right.
that we use, but it's not really what's going on, I guess.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So Cushing's in horses is very different from Cushing's in other species, right? Because in Cushing's in dogs, the problem is primarily an adrenal gland problem. So it's an overactive adrenal gland that's producing excess cortisol, excess steroid. So you see an interesting looking hair coat, sometimes a dry hair coat. You have a lot of problems with immune problems, but it's coming from the adrenal gland. So they actually treat with a different drug. Whereas in horses, it's coming from kind of a softening and a lack of integrity in this, posterior pituitary area. And so it's very different from what we see with other species. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, because
so I think that does make it hard.
Is the word that is the acronym that I recall.
Right.
Yeah.
The posterior pituitary and the PPID.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly. So, I think that's why, it gets confusing, is because these horse diseases are different. So again, it's kind of the same thing. Why do we keep renaming this insulin problem, right? So it was metabolic disease, and then it was insulin resistance, and now we're calling it insulin dysregulation. And the reason it keeps getting renamed is that we don't really know what we're dealing with. We're renaming it as we find out more about what's actually happening. So we used to think it was very similar to diabetes, type 2 diabetes in people. So that's why we called it insulin resistance. So with type 2 diabetes in people, the problem is a sugar problem. So the blood sugar is affected. It's often diet related. And if you can change the diet, then you can change the syndrome, right? So you can get the insulin levels to come down. A lot of things can happen if you just get that blood sugar to come down. So a lot of what we use as treatments are targeted at lowering blood sugar. And what we're finding is that in horses anyway, the problem is less about the blood sugar and more about the high insulin. And so it's more about figuring out why is the insulin level staying high and how do we change that, than it is about how do we change the sugar level. So it's just, that's why they're renaming it. So we're looking at different things now with that. So just kind of, just so we can move on from this slide.
Yeah. It's just okay, but if we're confused, we're rightly so confused.
Yes. It changes every year, and none of us know what we're doing, and we're still struggling. And even the experts, are learning every year. So just to look at this slide real quick so we can move on, when we talk about these, we're looking for older horses, may have had chronic stress in their life. They often have signs of obesity, so that crusty neck, so they have like an extra arch to their neck. Sometimes they have a poor hair coat, or your farrier might say, oh, he has rings on his seat. I wonder if he's ever had a case of founder or had laminitis. Oftentimes they have immune problems, like they have more skin problems, or maybe they have asthma, breathing issues, or they have chronic infections that you can't seem to get away, like abscesses or tooth problems, something like that. So you're looking for all of these things when you start talking about these horses. So this insulin dysregulation, our new name, right? What are we talking about? They're also sometimes calling it this hyperinsulinemia associated laminitis, when you have a horse with insulin dysregulation that gets laminitis, right? So we have to create new acronyms so we can find new ways to keep everyone confused. Okay. So, what we're talking about again is it's problem of an insulin problem. It's not a problem of sugar. It can be a part of it. That I'm not saying they can have as much sugar as they want, but the primary problem is that we have to clear the insulin. Insulin is highly inflammatory. So a horse that has high insulin over years that's sustained is going to be really uncomfortable. It's going to be really sore. They're going to have a hard time working. Their performance is going to go down. They're maybe going to be crankier than they used to be. You're going to have problems with their feet. Obviously, this inflammation is going to affect the blood vessels in the feet and the hoof lamina. You're probably going to have some immune issues, some GI issues. So all of this kind of, comes to the forefront when we talk about these insulin dysregulation horses. And when we look at patterns of when do you see laminitis come up, the ones that we're seeing right now are the insulin dysregulation horses. So these are the horses that founder after a period of no growth of grass and then a period of fast growth of grass. Because what's happening during that stress period is that the grass is kind of lying dormant and producing lots of fructans. And those fructans are a part of what's very inflammatory and causes a lot of problems for the horse's body. So it's all laying there right under the surface of the ground, accumulating during either summer drought or a winter, cold, right? Because they're both the same thing. It's where the grass isn't growing. And so then when we have these bursts of rain like we have now, and that grass all of a sudden comes up, that first few inches that comes out is going to be what's really high in the dangerous sugars, like the fructans, which is what we're trying to kind of avoid. And that's when those horses actually have a laminitic event. So if you have a horse that's at risk, this is the time of year to either have them muzzled, because that's the only way you can limit their feed, or have a perimeter system so that they're on a track system, they're not getting as much grass, or have them in a dry lot, keep them in a stall some of the time, whatever you have to do to limit the amount of grass they have. So this is kind of our typical PPID case, or Cushing's case, right? So they start to lose top line. They have these really thick coats that are sometimes curly. They're not shedding when they should be. They'll have kind of like a pot belly. They often have problems sweating normally. They usually drink a lot. They pee more than normal. They have all kinds of infections because their immune system isn't functioning. They elevated cortisol in their body is going to make it hard for them to fight off infections. So this is more of your typical Cushing's horse. And these horses have problems associated with when does their body produce the most cortisol. And that's like a yearly cycle. So most horses will naturally produce more cortisol between the months of July, August, September, and October than the rest of the year. So typically we see these guys in that period of time. Usually it's more like August, September, October, kind of our fall months. And it's just that steroid level in their body just becomes overwhelming. And that's when we see the laminitis that we see with those guys. Okay. Mm-hmm. All right, so this is one of the, there's this really great group that's out of Tufts that does a whole bunch of research on all the endocrine diseases. And this is what they're talking about with insulin dysregulation now, is that, it's kind of this interesting group population, right? So just having Cushing's or just being overweight or just having the insulin dysregulation doesn't make the horse necessarily as likely as if they have a combination of those things. And that's when we really worry about them having, a laminitic event and foundering. So if you can try to prevent those from all overlapping, you're going to have a much better chance of keeping your horse from having a serious problem. So that's why a lot of us focus on getting the weight off, right? Because that's one of the 3 factors, regulating Cushing's if they have it, and then trying to regulate their insulin levels. So as much of that as you can get under control, you want to do to minimize the risk of founder.
So it's when you hit that trifecta in the middle that you're really in trouble.
Yeah, yeah, you don't want to do that. Bad things happen. You know. And so, this is kind of, how they would recommend treating, right? So, it talks a lot about what are you looking for? You're looking for problems with, do you see hoof rigs? Do you see fat? Do you have problems that you think maybe they have some issues with hormone disease? Or are you worried about that? And then you can test them. And so if they are overweight and their insulin is high, then we definitely want to decrease their fat, right? Get them thinner, go on a low starch diet, which we know can help, exercise them, and see what we do. So what we have added into this, which we think is really important, is we're adding in treatment of the liver as a big part of how we treat the GI tract. So we think that a big part of this insulin dysregulation is that the liver isn't clearing the insulin the way it should be. And I think the more and more I've learned about how the GI tract works, I've started to consider the liver as a part of the gastrointestinal system, because it's really important for making sure that things get digested correctly, right? Because it secretes bile, making sure we have good enzymes in there. It filters out a lot of toxins, and it's going to make sure that insulin is released in the right numbers, that sugar stores are released from the liver in the right numbers. It kind of times that whole GI process so that everything gets absorbed efficiently. And I think when the liver gets overtaxed, then we have a lot more problems. So some of that can be, if they're overweight, is there overwhelming amounts of fat going into the liver and it can't handle that, so it's not doing its other jobs as well. Some of it can be that we're putting a lot of drugs through their body, and that's going to create problems for the liver where it can't function as normally. Or is it high stress? They've been filtering out high levels of cortisol for a long time. So I think we need to take that into account. So what we've started doing is we put a lot of horses on milk thistle, which is just a nice, safe, cheap herb that can help reverse changes to the liver. So we do that. And then we're also using something called N-acetylcysteine, which seems to help with that a lot. And then there are some other sort of drugs that have been out on the market for a long time. So a lot of people have been using a drug called Metformin to decrease blood glucose. You guys, if you have laminitic horses, you might have heard about Metformin. What most people who have used it feel is that it's really expensive and it lasts or works for 2 to 3 months, and then it stops working. And most people keep their horses on it long term, but I don't think it does a whole lot beyond decreasing that blood sugar initially, because the problem in the horses isn't the blood sugar, it's the insulin. So there is a new medication that the guys at Tufts are trying out now to see if that one might work better, and it's called Stiglatro. And it seems to be having a bigger effect on insulin and really getting that insulin level down. And it also seems to be decreasing pain. So right now it's in research studies. You usually have to talk to them and get in on the studies that they're doing there, and then they'll help you figure out dosing. But if you have a horse that's really refractive and you can't get the insulin under control with good diet changes, like good forages, getting away from the starches, making sure that their gut is healthy, and the liver stuff, then I think this is another option that seems to be coming up that would be really good for these guys. So I have one old horse that worked on.
I didn't know that the liver cleared the insulin.
Yeah, right. Because liver's your filtering organ.
Right.
So anything that needs to be cleaned out and filtered, that's its job.
Well, some things go through the kidney, right? So those are
some things do, yeah. But I think for insulin, it's definitely through the liver.
Well, and I just like liver, spring, glutathione, for people, it's avocados and asparagus. I eat in my asparagus every single day, and milk thistle. Having had liver stuff in the past, I'm a little familiar with it. It's also when liver's not happy, it can be very angry.
Yes. Yeah, right. So it makes sense if spring is when you need to, fix your liver, that maybe this is related somehow.
Yeah.
Because
And dandelion, that's another one that's really good for liver. So
right, dandelion's great for the liver. I love dandelion. I love milk thistle. Those are like two of my go-tos for liver stuff. Absolutely. Yeah, and glutathione is another one that I haven't used a lot, but it's a great option to add in there. We just have to figure out. I'm sure that Dr. Harmon probably knows how much to give.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know for horses. Yeah, for people, it's yeah, interesting. The circles keep coming back around and around.
I know. Yeah. So, but I really do think that this is the key. So this is again, looking at more of the Cushing's axis. We'll kind of review this. But when you look at over on the left side, it's talking about the liver as being really important for focusing and changing inflammatory genes, right? So, and how is that connected to ACTH? So there is a feedback loop on the left that's between the liver and ACTH and the adrenals, as well as on the right is our typical Cushing's axis. So I think there's a lot we're still trying to figure out, but it does seem like a big key to helping these laminitic horses is diet, getting the gut right, and then a part of that for us is our trace minerals, like we were talking about, our copper and zinc, because those minerals in particular seem to be really important for neurotransmitters. And I think that's a big key of it, is getting the enteric meaning the gastrointestinal tract, so the enteric nervous system, which is its own little nervous system, healthy. And I think when we put in a lot of zinc and copper, we help that to function more normally, so then we can get everything in the gut working right. And that's going to help with the liver as well. So that's kind of our key, is good forage, low starch diets with good protein, decent fat sources, get away from inflammatory fat and protein sources, add in our good trace minerals, make sure that they're getting some exercise. And then if we need to do extra things, then we support the liver so that it can do its job. And that seems to work for a lot of the insulin dysregulation cases.
And we have so much more GMO products in our feeds and everything else now. And if there's, again, that would be something the liver is going to have to cope with.
Mm-hmm. Right. I think that's a really good point. Right? Yeah. We talk a lot about, and people, and maybe our listeners are the smart, intelligent people that are smarter than me and know all of this stuff. But for me, it was kind of eye-opening to realize that GMO often means Roundup Ready, which means that it's going to be exposed to a lot of pesticides, and not necessarily that it's more nutrient dense. It just means that it's easier for the farmers to keep the weeds out, right? So yeah, I think if you are feeding a lot of food sources that are GMO, you may actually be exposing the horse to something that has a lot of glyphosate on it, which I think is not as safe as anyone would like to say it is. If we can eliminate that, it would be a great thing to do. Definitely isn't helping your horses. We just had this huge conversation in our office about soy, because soy has a reputation for being very inflammatory, right? So like if I can get soy out of diets, I love to do it. If I can get wheat middlings out of diets, I really like to do that, because that causes a hindgut acidosis and dysbiosis. So like those are like the two I'm always trying to get out of feeds. But soy is usually almost all GMO, so it has a high level of glyphosates on it, and then it has a lot of inflammatory compounds. So trying to find soybean meal that isn't inflammatory is almost impossible. But there's like a couple different ways now that they're talking about, if you can get organic soy, and then you have to process it a certain way that's like heat treated, then you can get rid of all of the extra hormonal components that are in it, that cause a lot of the inflammation, and you can stay away from the glyphosates. So at least there's some way to make it, something that we can use as a good protein and fat source, again, without having to use the inflammatory version of it. But yeah, you can go down that rabbit hole.
Let's not.
So just to review on the right, when you guys are looking at Cushing's forces, we have this feedback loop between stress and the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. So where it says anterior lobe here, this is your posterior pituitary. This is where ACTH comes out of. That's where we're looking for Cushing's to come into play, is that there's a problem with that lobe and we have an overproduction of ACTH, this hormone here. So ACTH then goes down to the adrenal glands, which are sitting on top of the kidneys, and it tells it to produce cortisol. So cortisol is your natural steroid. And so cortisol will increase blood glucose and suppress the immune system, right? So this is not something you need, is more blood glucose if you already have, a problem with the lamina. But one of the things that can cause this whole axis that isn't a problem with the pituitary gland is stress, right? So the same thing happens with chronic stress. So a lot of horses that are getting tested as pre-Cushing's or, borderline Cushing's horses are somewhere between the ages of 10 and 20. And they're usually show horses, or horses that have been in performance barns for a long time. And I think that what we're testing and saying is, oh, they have elevated ACTH, they have Cushing's, is probably, oh, they have chronic stress. And so what happens when we put them on percent or something like that is we're suppressing this, we're stopping this feedback loop. So normally the ACTH goes up and then cortisol is suppressed. And at some point, cortisol gets high and it feeds back and it shuts the system down, right? But when you put them on percent, you're putting a stopgap in that. You're keeping the communication system from functioning normally. So there's really no great way for them, to talk to each other. So stress will cause increased cortisol on its own without this feedback loop as well. You'll still have a lot of the changes. And now you've messed up the feedback loop. So I think it's kind of important in that case to start thinking about what's going on with the horse and why is that ACTH level elevated before you put them on the percent. And sometimes it could be something like maybe they've been, stressed. They've been on a high soy diet that has a lot of endocrine, and hormonal additives in it, right? So it could be maybe changing things on its own, right? And maybe they've had ulcers or GI issues. Maybe they're lacking the right vitamins and minerals to be producing normal hormone levels in their body, like we've talked about with zinc and copper. And so sometimes if we can eliminate stress and take away the feed that may be, more inflammatory or more have more hormones in it, and we can change the trace minerals, we can do a lot to change that ACTH level so that they don't need to go on the medication. And I think that in the long run, they're going to be healthier longer without it. It's really hard to take them off percent once you start.
And there's really only one option, percent, right?
There is one other drug that, when you were talking about, like, how do you treat for, is it Cushing's or is it a different kind of Cushing? We do actually have a few horses that we've put on the canine Cushing's medication, which actually treats adrenal problems. It doesn't treat the ACTH, it truly treats the adrenal problem. And I have had a few horses that's the only thing that has changed them. So they truly have an adrenal problem versus a pituitary problem.
Right.
So that's your only other choice. Yeah, that's kind of it.
Yeah. So once you pull that one out of the box, there's, like you say, you can't get them off, and so you're kind of on. And
I think because you've suppressed this system, like you've stopped, the communication from happening, it can be really dangerous to stop percent cold turkey, because you can create more of a problem for them when you take them off, because it's all been shut down, and then you can create laminitis. So like we are very slow. Like I take over a year to take horses off of percent.
Wow.
You know, like we'll do like a half tab for a while, and then maybe we'll go to a half tab every other day, you know, and we try to time it for the right time of the year so that we're not trying to limit the amount of percent they have in that, you know, July to October period where they're at risk, you know, and then we make sure that we're testing them as they're coming off of it so that we know that they're normal. So it's not something that you can, you know, listen to what I'm saying today and go home and be like, I'm going to take my horse off percent. That would be a really bad idea. Don't do that.
So
it's something that you have to very carefully do.
Yeah, you want to do everything you can to not need it until it's absolutely necessary, rather than starting it just because and then getting caught up.
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah. Like, you know, try to wait on the drugs and do some of these other changes first. And you may find that you don't necessarily need to do those. So I had a little pony of my own that I got maybe 4 or 5 years ago, and she was, you know, kind of overweight. She kind of looked a little more crusty than this pony in this picture, and she was voracious, you know, would not stop grazing. You let her out of the barnyard and her head was in the grass. You know, all the other horses would be taking breaks and running away from the flies, and she'd be out there eating and just getting obese. And her ACTH level was, I think it was like 55 or 60. So normal is lower than 35. So all I did for her is I changed her diet and I put her on, at the time I used Kiss Trace. So, but I put her on a zinc copper balancer palette. And I just checked her every year. So the first year we had her, she was at like 55 in July. And so every July we checked her levels. And after that first year, it went down to 35 and it stayed between 25 and 35 for the rest of her life. And the really interesting thing about it is that as soon as her zinc and her copper levels started to normalize, she stopped needing to eat all the time. So I think there truly was like a trace mineral deficiency that was part of why she was eating. Because as soon as that normalized out, she got to go out with the rest of the herd. I didn't have to graze. Never used a grazing muzzle. She stayed out on grass 24/7. Wow. You know, didn't stay heavy. So that kind of made me a big believer in, okay, we can do a lot for these horses without doing the meds, just because I got to play with it on one of my own. You know, that always helps you to feel more involved.
Sure, but that really brings up such an interesting question of whether or not the reason they're eating is to try and find something that is not available, right? Essentially.
Right. Yeah.
Wow.
I think that is part of it. And I know like we have to use muzzles in Virginia because, you know,
well, I mean,
nobody's grasses are they're just too rich. But I think there are some problems with muzzles. You know, they cause a lot of incisor wear. You know, they can cause pole problems. So if there's a way to not have to put a muzzle on, I think that the horses are going to be better off in the long run.
Yeah. So, yeah, because I mean, we've gotten this rain and I'm looking at my lawn and it's emerald green.
Right.
And so and then so many people have cow hay in their fields because there's so much cattle actually here in Virginia. There's a lot of cattle. You know, my horses live on their number one plant in their field right now is buttercups, which I hate, but rather buttercups than lush grass.
Yeah, that's the trade-off. I know if you spray for the buttercups, then you get like huge amounts of really lush green grass that your horses don't need. Yeah.
Right. So yeah. Wow. But the mineral thing is interesting. Now, what about feeding something like seaweed that's going to have a lot of trace minerals? Is that something that you can use?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that can be really good, especially for the horses that have adrenal fatigue. I think it actually really helps with the potassium, sodium, you know, a lot of these other little minerals besides the copper and the zinc that can help with adrenal issues. So the adrenal gland is really important for producing steroids, but it also is really important for balancing out sodium, potassium in the body. And so if they're like a lot of these Cushing's horses are drinking a lot, peeing a lot, right? I think that's another part of that, is that sometimes there's an adrenal component. So anything we can do with the kelp to even increase, improve that with the sodium and potassium, as well as what else, kelp has a lot of zinc and copper too. So there are a lot of good reasons to feed kelp. I think, I don't know if it has enough necessarily. Like, I just think we're so zinc deficient. We're like beyond deficient. So kelp is a good first step, but it might not be enough. So yeah, if I have to pick any supplement for a horse, my only supplement on most horses is a trace mineral. Like, just put them on a trace mineral. And I think part of the reason I do that too is that I don't feed a lot of processed feeds. So most of the time I'm taking away whatever companies feed that they're feeding and putting them on a hay pellet. And so I think, especially when you do something like that, where you're taking them onto like single ingredient feeds and taking away all the vitamin mineral complexes that are in all of the packaged feeds, then the trace mineral becomes really important, right? Because you need something to make sure they're getting all of those.
So someone's asking, and it's a good time for this question, would you recommend feeding zinc and copper supplements as a general plan, i.e. when there doesn't seem to be an issue, thinking like taking vitamins in case you aren't getting your diet?
Yeah, I don't think you can ever go wrong with adding in a really good trace mineral supplement. A lot of the ones that you can buy in the feed stores are not really good trace mineral supplements. They're going to have a lot of additives. They're going to have all those sulfates that we were looking at. So, the three that I mentioned are really good. If you can find something very similar to those, there's a couple others out there that I didn't mention that are pretty similar. I think that would be the way to go. So you want something that has amino acid bound zinc and copper, and you want high levels, like between the biggest, usually the copper and zinc are at a ratio. So if you look at the zinc, it'll be higher. And usually you want the zinc between 800 and 1,000 milligrams a day. And that will kind of help you find a baseline of what you want to feed. Yeah, but I think it's just huge.
I take my zinc every day, so.
Me too. It definitely helps. Yeah. So that's kind of the take home, is this insulin dysregulation causes a lot of inflammation in the body, like you're seeing at the top. Obesity can create a whole lot of strain on its own, but putting on these muzzles, I think, often makes them hungrier. So then they even want to eat more. So if there's a way we can get away from that, I think we should try. So that's why we use a lot of track systems. If anybody's willing to put one of those in, where you have like a little 12 to 14 foot aisle that the horses stay in, most of the time, so they're out and moving, and you give them hay on one side and water on the other side. I think that can be really helpful if you're really worried about grass. As they get older, as they have insulin problems, their metabolism isn't working as well, their liver isn't functioning as well, right? They might be more likely to be oversedated, or more, maybe other drugs or medications are going to be harder for them to filter out. They're going to have immune system problems. Their gut's not going to be working as well. So you might have a higher parasite level than they used to when you do your fecal egg count. All these sorts of things will happen.
So someone's asking about Arizona Copper Complete, comparing to the ones that you've mentioned here.
I think I've heard good things about that one. I would look at it and check it out. So you really want, like I said, you want to find your copper and zinc with an amino acid complex, whatever that is. And then I think I love this one. I think is the highest. Vermont Blend is the highest one at 900 milligrams.
Which one is that?
This is the Vermont Blend.
Oh, okay.
And then I think the high point works really well. You have to feed it at double. So it's twice a day, double dose compared to what it says, to get the right amounts. And the zinc, the Kiss Trace is really good too. I think, you just have to find one that fits your budget, that your horses will eat, because there are certain horses that like certain ones. And I don't think there's any sort of gold standard that everyone will eat. The horses are all picky in their own ways. So you just have to find one that will work for your feeding program.
All right. So someone's asking, their horse's IRN has Cushing's, soaking Hay Daily, Purina Triple Crown Balancer, Thyroid L, Insulin Wise, half tab %, numbers under control, but low energy, lost top line, and ribby.
Right? That's pretty typical. So, I mean, that would be the kind of case where I would probably maybe start with doing a hair analysis, right? Because we do have some of these cases that come up with heavy metal burdens or are not excreting at all. So that's always kind of good to know. It's just another part of it. But I would try to switch from your balancer cubes, get off of the balancer cubes, and go to a hay pellet and a trace mineral. That's like a huge game changer, just getting away from the processed balancer pellets and moving to something that is just a really simple ingredient, hay pellet plus your really good trace minerals. I think that would make a huge difference. You know, start there. And then you said the horse was on 0.5%. And does it have an elevated insulin or not?
Hang on. She said the numbers were getting better. Numbers under control, but low energy.
Low energy. Yeah. So then I think what you're going to probably end up needing to do is add in protein, because I think she said something about a lack of top line, right?
Yep.
So the way to do that is to add a high protein source into it. So one of the things that we like to use is a product out there called Cool Stance, and it's a coconut product. It looks like bran. You know, it's a powdered brown powder. And what I do is I add that into my hay pellets, and you have to add water. So you mix it in, and I usually I have my dry feed that's pellets and powder. And then however much that is, I add equal amounts of water to that, and it fluffs up in like 30 seconds, and then you can feed it. So you don't have to soak it, but you do have to add the water before you feed it. And I've never had a horse not eat it. Sometimes people, I think if you start with it, maybe for a couple of days, they might, you know, it smells different. It might take them a little while to get used to it. So maybe start with small amounts and introduce it slowly. But that's a really high protein source. If you have one that needs protein and a little extra fat, there's a product out there called Renew Gold that's a pelleted, it's flax and rice bran and Cool Stance. So I have used that. You know, I think there are better fat sources than flax, you know, processed flax and rice bran, but that one's pretty, you know, it doesn't have a lot of other, you know, qualities, other ingredients in it. It's pretty safe and it seems to work really well. So we've used that one. I'll use it sometimes more in the winter when I'm just trying to add a few extra fat calories from the horses that aren't getting any grass. But yeah, I would think starting there. You know, I have not seen a lot of horses improve on the insulin wise. I know it's really well marketed, especially because it comes through a lot of veterinary marketing. So, I mean, I have one horse out of all of the ones that have tried it that occasionally seems to have a flare up if we take him off of it. And none of the other horses I know of, I've really seen an effect one way or the other. So it might be something to consider, but you know, like I can say we had one that it definitely helped, but I don't know, that would be another thing that you might be able to remove at some point and see where you're at. But I would definitely look at changing the diet for that horse for sure.
So is it Cool Stance is the coconut product?
Yeah.
Is that KOO? Is it COOL?
It's COOL. So like cool calories, you know, I think that was the idea. Cool Stance. The name of the company is Stance Equine. A lot of feed stores carry it. It comes in like 50-pound bags. And it's just a dried coconut. But it's really great.
But you need to add water. That's that. I think we
you just have to add water.
We didn't.
They don't like it dry.
Like, I will not eat this, and I was like, okay, fine.
yeah. Well, and I think that's why the Renew Gold is sometimes nice, as the ones that are super picky. At least it's a pellet. It's a little easier to get them to eat. I think I just have a couple more slides. So just real quick, this is just kind of food for thought. This is just something we're starting to think about. So, you know how we were talking about that. The plants produce a lot of fructans with drought or cold, and they're going to store those, you know, under the grass, right? So when the grass starts to grow, then you see that the fructans are released. Well, there are these enzymes in, so the words enterocyte and hepatocyte up here. Those are cells in the GI tract and in the liver. So these are going to break down fructose, right? And so when you have a lot of fructose being broken down, it causes damage to the liver, and it causes oxidative damage to the cells. Since hepatocytes are what removes insulin from the blood, you're going to have a lack of insulin removal from the blood. It's going to affect liver function. Same thing, right? We have all these fructans from the grasses, right? And then they're all being broken down in the GI tract. So now you have oxidative damage to the intestinal system, which can cause intestinal membrane permeability. The other thing you'll see is strep bacteria, which are common. They're often in the GI tract, love to break down fructans. So one of the times you'll often see high levels of strep bacteria is post-antibiotic treatment. Those oftentimes will kind of thrive. You might see those before or after, so that can cause ammonia toxicity. And ammonia, if it builds up, can cause a lot of problems with inflammation in the body too. So just kind of food for thought, that, kind of thinking along this GI liver idea, that if we can control the fructose, maybe more than the glucose, then that might be the dietary change. It's not about the sugars, it's about the fructose in the foods that they're eating. So just one more thought.
And it's just interesting to me to see that those sugars are going to come up at the same time as there would be plants that could actually help it if the horse was in a more natural, for the lack of a better word, environment, right? Where
yeah, like if we could plant native grasses in our pastures and get all those dandelions growing and get all that stuff in there, I think the horses would probably do a lot better.
Yeah, and there'd be less grass, so there's less sugars coming up, there's more plants to help them.
Yeah, that's somebody needs to start a pasture planting program where they put all this good stuff in there. So this is kind of your take home. So maintain their weight. It's okay to be a little skinny coming into the spring. Really good, trace minerals. You can add in things like milk thistle, dandelion, N-acetylcysteine. That's what NAC is. It's an it's an enzyme that helps the liver. Support good GI health, right? So we want to stay away from any sort of acidosis. So balanced feeds, forages, things that take a long time to be broken down that are for good, good gut bacteria. We don't want our grasses to be overgrazed because the really short grasses are the ones that are affected the most. So trying to keep your pastures a little bit longer, don't mow them to the shortest point can help. Do these perimeter tracks, the paddock paradises, things that get them moving around, looking for different things in the pasture. If you're worried about your pasture, the sugars will increase over the day, especially on days like today where it's not super hot. So early morning's better. And then look for other causes of hyperinsulinemia, like, are feeds the problem? Do they have heavy metal residues? Do we have pesticide residues? Do we have the wrong bacteria? Are we feeding the wrong food sources? Things like that. So that's kind of all of it in a nutshell. Do you guys have any questions?
Well, this is interesting because after my horse, we realized he was PPID, but I did a hair analysis and he was completely off the charts in lead, mercury, and cadmium. Like there was no number. It was so high. And now we've put him on a detox and gotten his numbers down. He's going to be on detox for at least another year. But, the years when it was the worst, the hair coat and everything else. And now he's shed out and, we can see improvement and that sort of thing. So, there's more than one factor, I guess what I'm trying to say is, we looked at this horse and he doesn't have a rich pasture, et cetera, but these other factors that we didn't know were playing in were wreaking havoc, and of course lead stored in the brain. I have one question about pasture. If you let your pastures grow so that they're going to seed head, is that safer than the short grass pastures?
I don't know. That's a really good question, right? Like, I think there's probably a happy medium somewhere in the middle. Like, I don't know if you want the grass to be that long where they're eating all those seeds either, but I don't think you want it super short. So I would think somewhere in the middle is probably better. There are so many problems when your grass gets that long with dew poisoning and scratches and all of those sorts of things. And the ticks can climb up them better, that I feel like that maybe we have to pick somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, because it's like, okay, I've got super short, or I got going to seed, and I was like, well, that's browsing, so at least now they're above
right. Yeah, right. I think somewhere in the middle is probably the best.
Okay. So like a 6 to 6 inch grass, then I mean, if
yeah,
you're in bush hog, you bush hog it at 6 inches.
right, that would probably be about perfect, right? Then you're not letting it be too stressed because it's too short, and you're not letting it grow out too far. I think that would be about perfect if we could all just manage that, right?
And I just fix it. Yeah, right. And somebody's asking about your thoughts on thyroid.
Thyro-L. So I tend to not use it very much. I think if you ask any veterinarian, what we'll all tell you is that we're not treating actual thyroid disease. So when you put a horse on Thyro-L, you're treating a number that's a low thyroid, on blood, and you're trying to get weight off of a horse, but you're not actually treating thyroid disease. And I think for a lot of them, it actually kind of makes them feel a little funky, right? Because it's increasing their heart rate. It's going to make them kind of feel a little jittery. So I don't know if it's maybe the most pleasant sensation to be on high levels of thyroid supplementation if it's not needed. And there is something that we all talk about in human and in veterinary medicine called euthyroid sick syndrome. And what that means is that thyroid levels will go down anytime an animal or a human is stressed or sick. So when you're using Thyro-L, if I do use it, which is not very often, but I have used it, it's because I'm desperate to get weight off of a horse, and there's no other way that I can do it. But I try to then wean them off of it. Again, this is when you can't stop cold turkey. You have to slowly wean them off of it. Like every month you decrease it by 1/4 to 1/2. So it can take multiple months to get them off of it, because you have to give the body time to then adapt to you removing this stimulus and create its own natural thyroid again. I think that, if we can get those trace minerals in, I bet you can get the thyroid functioning a lot better, and you wouldn't need the thyroid supplementation as much. So I very rarely use it unless I'm looking at like an obese laminitic horse that can't walk, can't exercise, and I'm not able to regulate their weight with diet, then I might use it temporarily. But I think it's just a quick fix in the majority of cases.
Oh, look, he's woken up from his nap, and so now he wants to go out, so he's wandering around. I just thought I'd introduce him. This is Buster. Buster with the multiple heart problems. It gets 4 different medications a day now, but doesn't know he has a heart problem. So we don't tell him, other than we get whipped cream for our pills. That really works.
That's right. Cats are special.
Oh yeah, they really are. Well, Mary, this has been yet another super fascinating webinar. And again, I've learned so much, and I've been feeding kelp, but I think now I'm going to go out and look for another supplement that's going to up that zinc and copper and make sure that that's in there.
Absolutely. Well, and if anybody has any questions about it, give us a call. You can just look up True North Equine, go on the website and find us. I'm happy to look at diets and talk to people, and we can certainly help with that, do some consulting and see if anyone has any questions. We're happy to answer them.
Great. Yeah, because there's so much to unpack in here in such a short period of time. But the good news is you can all go back and watch this again on the Surefoot Equine YouTube channel, because they are all recorded and just sitting there waiting for you to listen. And are we done? Is this your last slide?
I think I have like a joke slide after this.
Oh, great. Let's do the joke slide.
And like that. So those are our 2 Cushing's meds that we use. That's the other one, the Veteril for the adrenal ones. This is my last one.
Oh, that's great. We do need a laugh, because sometimes this can be so challenging, and finding the answers and understanding what we're dealing with. As long as I've known about it, there's still stuff to learn and ways that we can improve our horse's health. And so I want to thank you so much for coming back. And I know we have another webinar coming up with you. We're just going to keep having you come back as long as you're willing, because it's really terrific, and everybody's really enjoying and appreciating your your knowledge and sharing that with us. So I want to thank you so much for this.
Oh, thank you. It was fun. So
Yeah.
yeah, please, if you guys have something in particular you think would be an interesting topic, let me know. I'll see what I can do.
Okay. All right. Thanks, everybody, and have a great week. It's Memorial Day weekend. Do something fun and enjoyable, and we'll see you again soon when we come back with another webinar. So everybody take care and have a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you very much.